In the description of graphs, usually we have three paragraphs in the piece of writing. In our description, there should be three paragraphs: introduction, body, and conclusion. Now, what are the things that should be included in each paragraph? In the introduction, first of all, usually the introduction can be put in 2 or 3 sentences. So don't make it short as one sentence. Try to make it 2 sentences. If needed, you make it 3 sentences. Now, the things that should be included in the introduction: the graph title. And if you remember, we discussed this in the introduction lessons. We said that there are certain things that we need to consider when describing a graph. So the first thing is the title of the graph, whether a pie chart or bar chart or line or whatever. The second thing is we have to include the information put in the vertical axis. Sometimes there are numbers. Most of the time there are numbers, and sometimes the numbers are in hundreds or in thousands or in millions, just like the previous example. So we need to include this information in the paragraph, in the introduction, sorry. Again, we have to look at the horizontal axis. For example, in the previous example, we had the primary, secondary, tertiary, which is university. So we need to include this information again in the introduction. And the key, you remember the key, which is on the top right corner. Usually it is put there. Sometimes it can be put at the bottom below the horizontal axis. So we have, these are the major things. We have to include these in the introduction. And there is something else, which is we need to write one general idea. One general idea, not specific. General idea about the whole graph. And there are certain, phrases and words that we have to use. We will come to that when we start doing some practice. Now, how to write an introduction. You remember this bar chart now. Now, we can move to the next slide and see how to write the introduction. But let me remind you of the elements that we need to include in the introduction, as mentioned in the previous slide. We said that we need to include the title, and here the title is education. We need to include the numbers here in millions. We need to include the sectors, which are primary, secondary, tertiary, and we need to include the key, which is the years 1970, 2000, and 2009. So here, how to write the introduction. If we want to write an introduction about the previous bar chart, this is one sample. And here when we say sample, this means that it is not the only way of writing an introduction. You might use different introductions, but the elements, the main elements that we talked about, should be there. Let's start with the introduction here. It says the bar chart. So here, the first thing to do is to include the name of the graph. That's why, if you remember, we focused on knowing the names of the graphs, whether this is a bar chart or line graph or table or pie chart or whatever. So you need to learn the names of the graphs. So the previous example and the one in your books on page 12, task 3, it is called bar chart. So we say the bar chart. This is the first part we have to start with. You have to mention the name of the graph. After that, you need to use a verb. A verb, here we have shows, and because we are describing, we need to use the present simple. So here we say shows because again the bar chart is singular. We can use shows or displays or illustrates or describes. We have many verbs that we can use to put here in this place. So the bar chart shows, and then we have now to start with the elements that are there in the bar chart. Here the first element is the number of people. So this is the number of people which is in the vertical axis, and in particular here in millions. You see, you have to show that the number is in millions, because in the in task 3 when we did sentence 4 which says that there were about 400 people, this was wrong, because it's not only 400, it's 400 million. So here we have to mention that the number of people is in millions. So the bar chart shows the number of people in millions who enrolled in education. So education here is the title. This is the second element. Who enrolled in education globally in 3 different sectors. 3 different sectors which are in the horizontal axis: the primary, secondary, and tertiary. And you can name them here. You can write the word namely, which means that you are going to list these things. So the bar chart shows the number of people in millions who enrolled in education globally in 3 different sectors. What are these sectors? Namely, primary, secondary, and tertiary, in 3 years. You remember the years? 1970, 2000, 2009? Again, you have to mention that. In 3 years. So this is the next element. And again, you can put the years: 1970, 2000, and 2009. So here, now we included all the elements. Now we have to add the general idea. You remember in the elements that should be included in the introduction, we said besides these elements, we have to add a general idea. This is the general idea. In all sectors, numbers increased significantly over the 40-year period. So this is not a specific idea, it is a general idea, because it talks about all the sectors, not only one sector. If you talk about one sector, for example, primary, this is a specific idea, it doesn't fit here. If you talk about secondary, again, it doesn't fit. So you have to talk about something which is general in the whole bar chart. So let's just recap what we have discussed. So we have to include all the elements. We have to include a general idea, and we have to use certain language. And the certain language here, as I told you, you have to mention the name of the graph, bar chart. You have to use certain verbs like shows, illustrates, displays, and these things. You have to use, look at the underlined word significantly. This is one of the words that could be used again. Okay, so here, this is this might be a good introduction, but let me point out something here. If you look at the first sentence, because here we have 2 sentences. If you look at the first sentence, it looks a little bit long, and it is not recommended to use long sentences when you write your description. So maybe it is better to divide this sentence into 2. in that case, we will have 3 sentences. So look now at this introduction. The bar chart illustrates, so here I changed the verb, the number of people in millions. Again, the same elements are there. You can see them, the same thing. Who enrolled in education globally, and we stopped here. See here, this is one sentence. Then the second sentence, they enrolled in 3 different sectors, namely primary, secondary, and tertiary, and we stop here. And then the chart shows the number of students enrolled in 3 years, 1970, 2000, and 2009, and again we stop. So even we divided that sentence into 3 sentences, not only 2, into 3 sentences. So it is better to keep the sentences short. You try to make your sentences short, not very long. And the last sentence is the same. So here we have 4 sentences, even not 3, because sometimes when you have too many information to be included, it's better to increase the number of sentences rather than having very long sentences.